Thank you so much. You know, one of the things, I live in Paris now, one of the things which I really don't miss about the UK is the trains. You know, I think every conference I've been to, there's been an announcement like that over the last few years. This is, of course, a sort of homecoming for me, it's such a pleasure to be here, to be able to do this. I mean, it was 9 years ago that Nick Chambers and I sort of kind of met up to think about what a new organisation might do, a new charity might do in this space. And we met up in a room in Holborn, and in a windowless room, and I think we met for hours and hours trying to kind of work through it all. And in the end, it all boiled down to some things which are kind of like very simple. In this area, there was so much which was happening, and this was about 2009. There was a lot of stuff happening, but a lot of stuff seemed to be taken for granted. People knew things were important, but they didn't know how important they were. It wasn't easy for people. And we kind of thought there was communities of policymakers, communities of practitioners, communities of researchers who needed to become closer together, probably outside of the aegis of government, and find places where they can interact. And that sort of, kind of like vision has kind of stayed with us, trying to understand just how important this thing is. You know, we're focused on education and employer engagement and education. And how do you make it easy to understand that? To understand, the insights which are found. And we knew that to do that, we had to work collaboratively. And one of the first things I did, as Prue just said, is I caught the train to Coventry, where Prue headed up a centre at the University of Warwick, which had for years been looking in this area. And she graciously welcomed me into the fold, and shared what she knew, and we became great collaborators. And in an event like this, I always instinctively look around for somebody called David Harborne, who many of you probably will know, who headed up the Edge Foundation for many years. And these were kind of like, communities were emerging of communities of interest, of people who instinctively get this and understand this thing which we're interested in about the connection between the world of work, the employer community and the educational community, and what it can achieve, and wanted to work together in a more strategic, in a more focused way. And obviously, Ollie Newton's here today, who has ably taken over David's mantle. And early in those years, as if from heaven, two fabulous researchers sort of came into the orbit of the Education Employers Task Force, Chris Percy and Elnaz Kashef-Bagdel. And the work that we've done has influenced things, and we're really proud of that. It's influenced career strategies, and it's influenced things, I think, kind of like around the world. But that's all about collaboration, and it's all about standing on the shoulders of analysts who can look at hard data and find really compelling evidence from that hard data, which is difficult for people to ignore. And I just think that's so important. I think this conference I was so pleased to be here. I kind of chaired this last time round, or sort of co-chaired it. And, looking down the lists of events which are happening this time, I see two communities here, an apprenticeship community and a schools community. There's lots of other people as well, but at heart those two are coming together. And that's really interesting. I'm going to start in a moment, but if you'll just bear with me, indulge me for a moment. Coming over, you kind of think back over things which you've done and things you've been, and probably one image stuck most closely in my mind. It was in Cumbria in, I think, 2010, and I was doing a focus group with 16-year-olds. They had just finished a program called a Young Apprenticeship, and I'm not sure people remember Young Apprenticeships. It was a pilot scheme. A few people do. Show of hands, Young Apprenticeships, anybody remember? Wow, there you go. You're my audience. All right. A Young Apprenticeship was between 14 and 16, a day a week, lots of work-based learning, lots of employer engagement, focused around areas of occupational interest. And this one was on performing arts, so the kids were great. They're very vocal, they're very interested, and they really were gushing about their experience. And as ever, as the researcher, you kind of, well, what's the negatives? Come on, give me the negatives. And they just wouldn't bite. There wouldn't be any negatives. And at one point, well, at the very end, actually, the girl opposite me, she kind of she leaned over and said, you know what, if school was like this, I'd love it. And I think that stayed with me, and I think it should stay with us in thinking about, kind of the world we want to see and what we want to achieve in all of this. Now, I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about apprenticeships. Secondly, I'm going to talk about career guidance. And then thirdly, I'm going to offer some kind of personal reflections on employer engagement and where it might go. And I do it from this context because I now, based in Paris, I work for the OECD, which is pretty much the only organisation which could have taken me away from here. And I joined the team, I lead the team now, which has been responsible for some of the most important, so kind of publications on effective characteristics of vocational learning, which we've seen, kind of learning for jobs, skills beyond school. And as a team, we've been working really hard on work-based learning over the last couple of years, and particularly apprenticeships. And in the autumn, probably October, I think the OECD will publish the single most important thing which it ever has done on apprenticeships. Today, and I'm going to talk about this a bit later, actually should be about exactly now being published, because I asked them. So exactly now, we should be publishing the paper on career guidance and employer engagement. I'll give you a bit of a preview of what that's got to say. Now, in the sort of like the job I do, the OECD is a membership organisation. So we have 36 member countries. Lithuania formally joined, I think, yesterday. So we've got 36 countries, and I visit them. My job is to kind of go out and talk to policy officials, talk to ministers about the challenges which they have, and they commission me and my team to do work. And we do all sorts of different things around perhaps work-based learning within school-based vet, or how vet systems can respond to the challenges of migrants. And as I sort of like travel kind of the world, and people come to Paris to talk about it, I hear some pretty sort of common refrains, some common concerns, where people kind of say to me, firstly, I think sort of kind of two things. Firstly, how can we build a world-class apprenticeship system? And when they're thinking about that, they're looking sort of like, I suppose, sideways or backwards. They're looking to what happens in Switzerland. They're looking to what happens in Germany. And they're thinking, well, how can we create a world-class apprenticeship system which is really, really attractive for employers, for young people, for older people? And then there's the second thing which they ask, which is, how can we make sure that our apprenticeship systems are generally resilient to the kind of the rising tide of change which we're seeing? And this is something which the OECD spends a lot of time on. Sorry, I'll take me a moment to get everything up on the screen. Here we go. Because there's these mega trends which we're seeing everywhere are really scaring policymakers, really scaring governments, and have some very significant implications for vocational education, for apprenticeship policy. So if we think, firstly, the elephant in the room is automation, digitalization of jobs. Lots of concern over this. Probably every 6 months or so, we'll see a new study coming out about, jobs are going to disappear, how many jobs are going to disappear, will they be replaced, what they'll be replaced by. Now, our analysis is, we're going to use our data from PIAC, from the Survey of Adult Skills, which hundreds of thousands of people undertake across the world every few years. And we break down the tasks that people do in their jobs. And then our analysis is to look at the tasks which people do, and then on that basis, look at the likelihood of, we think, whether their jobs are going to be automated or not. And across the world over the next 10 to 20 years, our assessment is that probably around 15% of jobs will just disappear. There's a 70% likelihood that they're going to be fully automated. But many, many more other jobs, maybe a third of jobs, we expect to be radically transformed, very significantly changed, because tasks will change. Secondly, we kind of see in terms of these kind of like mega trends, another implications for kind of for teaching and learning, which is obviously very related to thinking about, will jobs be there if we train people for them? Is there actually anything going to be there? It's thinking about the way that this graph down here on the bottom, your bottom left, about, this is about the way that across the OECD, and we see it in many countries, it's called like a hollowing out. We see sort of like growth of demand of higher skilled jobs. We see some sort of like growth much smaller level for very low skilled jobs. Often the things which are hard to automate, like sometimes cleaning streets properly, for example. But the middle skills are sort of like hollowing out. And there we kind of think, well, many of these are actually jobs which apprenticeships are aligned to, or there are stepping stones in terms of the skills. So how can we make that work? And then we see as well, as the new jobs emerge, the new forms of work, well, these aren't traditional employers and they aren't traditional workplaces. The Uber and the digital stuff like on-demand, just-in-time services which are emerging. And you think, well, how are we going to integrate that into an apprenticeship program? And these are all very significant challenges. And then finally, we have the very significant concern over raising inequality. 25 years ago, the richest 10% across the OECD were 7 times wealthier than the bottom 10%. Today, it's 9 times more. And so these are all, kind of challenges for us. And I don't presume that, we have all the answers to these very significant challenges which we're going to face, but I'm going to say they are here. And so what we find across the world, and I think in this country, as well as others, people are looking back and looking to the sideways saying, I really want to build a good apprenticeship system. I want it to be really solid. I want it to be much of the best in the world. But at the same time, the water is beginning to rise. And maybe maybe the metaphor is climate change, because the water will rise and we expect it to stay risen and maybe even rise higher. In thinking about you build your apprenticeship house, I'm really working this metaphor now, so stay with me. You build your apprenticeship house, and then you have to put it on stilts, to make it more resilient, more flexible, to be able to respond to kind of this changing world. And I want to just share some of the thoughts which, kind of speak to these two objectives, really. Having a really solid system which works in the first place, and then being able to make it flexible and resilient for the future. And in doing so, I'll draw on some of the insights from a report which we published in May, a review of the English apprenticeship system. In this, we look, I suppose, particularly about, in these general questions is, how do we make sure that apprenticeships are attractive to employers, to apprentices themselves, and to society? What's the societal interest involved in all of this? And in terms of employers, our starting point is always around the cost-benefit analysis. We think apprenticeships really need to pay. We think, if countries just throw money at employers to try and take them on, but it doesn't pay, particularly over the duration. And how it pays is that somebody learns a skill, learns a skill, and in that skill they're able to be more productive. And as a productive worker, they're generating greater returns to the enterprise. And apprenticeship systems are designed around this. That starts out with somebody with a lower level of skills, and through a process, the amount of time which they can spend on the skilled task increases. And this is actually a reason why it's so important that social partnership is balancing out kind of the demands of employers who want to maybe maximize the period of productivity, and trade unions and other social partners who want to make sure that the voice of the employees are represented. And in this, in trying to get to that point of increased productivity, there are things which countries do and things which England could learn from. And particularly here is about kind of learning on the job. A lot of the learning about work takes place in training providers or with training providers rather than with trainers in workplaces. And I think we would argue there should be more of that. But also, moving from traineeships to pre-apprenticeships and making sure that the apprentice, when they start, is in a good place to be able to get moved to that point, that tipping point of becoming the productive worker within the process. And secondly, thinking about the apprentices themselves, well, a lot of this is about quality, about the quality of learning. And the quality of learning will impact upon the results which come. Qualifications which aren't too narrow. If we kind of think about the way that the world is changing, narrow technical qualifications are going to be at risk in this new world. And one of our big recommendations was England was about the level of general education in an English apprenticeship. Now, in England, typically over an apprenticeship, somebody does between 50 and 100 hours of general education. Lots of it focused on basic skills. If you go to Germany or if you go to Norway, with some of these competitor countries, it's more like 500 hours or 600 hours. And if we kind of think about the flood tides coming in, about the new dynamism of the new economy, what we're going to expect young people to do is to be able to adapt and respond to these changes, to apply their knowledge in new and different ways. And that's about general education. That's about thinking about apprenticeship as part of a continuation of upper secondary, particularly for young people. And for old people, recognising what they do know, recognition of prior learning. And within this, so what we would see is that we recognise that in England, enormous progress has been made in terms of apprenticeships, but we still need to go further and build in the sort of resilience where we're kind of building into young people a capacity to be able to kind of respond to the changes which they're going to see. Now, as I was kind of saying, today we're launching, we call it a working paper. It's about 100 odd pages long. And what the paper does is it takes stock really around the international evidence on career guidance, and particularly the role of employer engagement within career guidance. And this is kind of freely available. I did ask for 100 copies to arrive here. I think they're on the Victoria line because they haven't arrived yet. If they do arrive, we'll make sure that they're prominently displayed. You're very welcome to have one. And the starting point of this, this paper is an acknowledgement that career guidance, and I should say I didn't write it, when one of the analysts in the team wrote it. Most of it was written before I arrived. But it just takes a long time to get things published in my organisation. But the starting point is that career guidance is more important than it has been historically, and it's more difficult. And it's more important because people are staying in education longer. They have more decisions to make. And we see that across the OECD, but particularly in this country. And it's kind of more difficult because if you think about that slide about the the 40 to 50% of jobs which are going to change, and in the UK, I should say, we think it's about a third of jobs over the next 10 years will be radically changed. Well, and we think about the way that people might have to make an investment in subjects or places of study to be able to relate to an ever-moving career aspiration, whereas the labour market is more dynamic. It's more difficult. And what we find is that in our analysis, we went back to our PISA data. Now I'm sure many of you know, but PISA is a study which happens every 3 years. More than 500,000 kids around the world, about 60, 70 countries, fill in a whole range of tests and questions about their background, about their aspirations and their interests and what they know. And over time, we can look at the trends. And there's a very significant trend you see in every country, pretty much, of young people having higher and higher aspirations. More and more of them want to be professionals with a university degree. More and more of them want to go to university. Fewer and fewer of them are interested in skilled jobs. There we go. They're allowed to write in what job they're interested in. So, 500,000 people have to, write in what job you're interested in. 30% of them are interested in 10 jobs around the world. And that calls back to some of the work which, I was involved in, my colleagues here were involved in a few years ago. Well, we looked at the labour market demand for the future, and we looked at, what the aspirations of young people were in the UK, and they had nothing in common. And what we see here is, we see something which is unrepresentative and problematic. But most importantly, of the new analysis we did was that we looked at career aspirations, interests, for example, in I want to be a professional, get a job which you need to go to university for example, and we looked about how they related to somebody's social class, their gender, and whether they had a migrant history or a migrant status. And we found in each of those cases, that it was patterned, it was shaped, it was driven by, there was a very significant relationship between your background and your aspiration. Now, we did something which is really important, which is quite hard to do. We were able to control for how good they were in their studies, their academic ability. We call it proficiency. Because in PISA, we ask them all these questions about maths and so on, and we give them tests. And with even controls in place for their proficiency, for how good they were in the tests, we find that these patterns still stay, which means, effectively, across the OECD, we're seeing working class kids, with lower aspirations, they're middle class kids, and they're just as able. And that is a real case for career guidance. It's an intervention which says that in the absence of something, we'll see patterns of social reproduction happening. Now, we look as well about the, whether career guidance works, and I was rather pleased when I arrived to see that. The paper with, I wrote with Deirdre Hughes. Where's Deirdre? I wrote with Deirdre. Deirdre somewhere. In 2016 for the Education Endowment Foundation, we did a literature review of career guidance interventions, which used randomized control studies, longitudinal tests, really hard data. And because they're all so different, it's a mentoring program here, ICT over there, job shadowing there, we just looked at, is it largely positive, largely negative, or a bit of a mix? And we found that in 2/3 of the cases, in terms of does this lead to an outcome in terms of economic benefits, better job prospects, or does it lead to an outcome in terms of educational improvement? We found in 2/3 of the cases, largely positive results. And that's very meaningful because it allows us then to look at what seems to make the difference, because it's in those other 30 cases, it's not that it was a complete waste of time and you've been better off in the classroom. It means that the results are mixed, which may be something about the way things were delivered. And so in the study as well, we go through the literature to try and make sense of the characteristics of effective careers delivery. And I know that many of you will understand some of those things. And I'm going to leave it for you to read up on that, because I'm scared I'm going to run out of time. But I would say that about 5 minutes. One of the things which I would emphasize is there's a very clear consensus now that career guidance must be enriched by employer engagement, by which I mean people in workplaces, workplace experience. And, we kind of agree that we're the coalition of the willing. We've already been bought into this. But it's not the norm. Across the OECD, only 30% of 15-year-olds have been to a jobs fair, a careers fair. That's not right. That's not good enough. And we're seeing movement, in the career strategies, but they're not going fast enough. Now, I'm going to I was going to read this to you, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to say, this is a quote from Andreas Schleicher, kind of head of education at the OECD, my boss, widely seen as the most influential man in education, or woman in education in the world. And the thing which he emphasizes here is the authenticity about what's involved. And I think that's something that we've stressed in the work that we've done. But I would say, the slides will be available, But what I'd say was that Andreas is not just interested in that in terms of careers. I don't think we should just be interested in terms of careers. What Andreas is interested in is, something unique about workplaces, as places of learning, as well as places which can motivate, educational engagement, thinking beyond careers. For Andreas, the new economy demands young people have the ability to be personally effective, applying the knowledge to new problems, and that for us talks to enterprise education and experiential learning, putting people in situations which have got reality and feel under stress. And these are things which are explored in this book, which is also out today. I had a word with them to see if we can manage it. I'm told you should never put an exclamation mark on a PowerPoint slide unless you have a book being published that morning. I think that's the only time you're allowed to use it. Is that right? And in this, there's a whole range of authors. Some of them are in the room. And in this, there are essays which look at the kind of how workplaces can be used as sites of learning. There are essays which look at the link between workplace exposure and academic attainment. There are chapters which go beyond careers. And I think that's something for us which is maybe the next barrier here, the next frontier. In the work I've done over recent years, there's one thing which I just finished before I kind of left here at Education Employers, and that the Education Endowment Foundation kindly asked me to do a literature review around kind of the purposes of employer engagement. And the thinking really was, can we move to a point where we have a strategic approach to this? Can we understand, what we think this can achieve? And so I reviewed the literature, and I found that across the literature we found evidence which shows that employer engagement, this relationship with the economic community and the educational community and the coming together of people within those, falls into 4 areas. Now, understanding jobs and careers, that's the career agenda, and we're there. Number 3, the knowledge and skills demanded for successful school-to-work transitions. The mock interviews, how does employment work? How does recruitment work? But also, think about the knowledge and skills demanded and in enriching educational experiences. And what I would say is that, as I come towards the conclusion, is that we have made some really important progress on careers, but there is a time, and perhaps this is the time, to think, well, maybe we should go beyond that. Maybe we should start thinking about pedagogy. Maybe we should start thinking about curriculum. Maybe we should start thinking about the ways in which education can reflect and respond to this changing economy to ensure its continuing relevance for young people. And we see a pattern here of apprenticeship provision becoming, I suppose, more scholarly. Having a stronger academic component because it needs to reflect and respond to the changes which we're seeing within society and the economy. But at the same time, general education, there's a very strong argument, will benefit from greater opportunity to apply knowledge, to be able to find enthusiasm and interest from young people and channel those. And so in this new coming together, which in part reflects the kind of the constituency we have in front of us, I would like to say, I think that we would all want to be in situations where we go to focus groups in Cumbria, and the teenage girl go across the road says, "School is like this. School is like this," and I love it. Thank you.